Our guest today is a media psychologist, a communication researcher, a diversity educator and consultant, an award-winning author, a TED speaker, and coming up on 14 years teaching at Texas A&M, Srivi Ramasubramanian. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So let's jump in with our icebreaker question. What is your favorite superpower?
I think I'd love to be in multiple places at one time.
Yeah.
Especially given, my bicultural life, growing up in India and being here with my family in India. I would love to sometimes be there as well as be here. And of course, be in some exotic beach at the same time. So yes. I can, at the blink of an eye, I can be at the beach on a lounge chair.
So then you would not partition your consciousness then? You would have your consciousness in one place and then would it be like a robot version of you somewhere else?
Yeah.
Okay. That would be fun. So digging into some deeper questions. So as a new guest on the show, we always enjoy starting off the conversation, hearing an overview of who you are and what you do. So tell us your story about a little bit about where you grew up and your education and so forth, and what brings you to Mays Business School this morning.
Yeah, I grew up in India, and I was actually... it's a funny story how I got into communication. I had, like every, hardworking high school student in India, had the ambition to become a doctor or engineer. Mm-hmm. Was going down that path. And then my neighbor, she says, I want to do communication and want to take an entrance test, aptitude test, and it's available only in a men's college. And she didn't want to go alone. Only that course is co-ed. Oh. And she said, can you come with me for company? I said, okay. And I went along. And then since I was sitting there, they gave me an aptitude test too. And I took it. And then she came back after a week and she said, you topped the aptitude test. Oh. And I didn't get in. And then I said, what? I wasn't even planning to do this. And my parents said, you clearly have an aptitude for that. Why don't you consider learning a little bit more about what this course is about, what communication is about? It was such a new thing in India at that time. Mm-hmm. And then as I learned more about it, I was convinced that this is what I should do. So I actually joined this 2,000 plus college with men, 2,000 plus men with 18 women. Huh? And it sort of set the tone in terms of my own interests in also gender and media that started from there. And then, and from then on, I was actually very grateful for the background in science and math, which actually helped me with some of the quantitative analysis that I do for my work. And then I was working in Bombay as a market researcher after doing my communication management. Actually, it's like an MBA with an emphasis in communication. Mm-hmm. And then my parents said, would you like us to find you a match to get married? And I thought that would take 2 years or so to happen. And I said, okay, why not? So then they come back to me saying that for the things that you want, the person, I think we have someone in mind for you. And then I spoke to that person, and he happened to be in the US, and it clicked. Oh. We liked each other, and my parents were like, no, you can't say, they weren't ready for it. And they said, you can't say yes to the first person. You need to talk to many more. Okay. But I said, well, it seems like this is the right person. And he just happened to be a professor at Penn State. Okay. A 27-year-old. So then I decided that I will do my GRE. Okay. And since I'm going to be in a small town university, let me do a PhD. Why not? and that's my story. It's a story of all kinds of unexpected twists and turns.
Sure.
Of how I landed up becoming a professor.
Right.
And then when I finished my PhD at Penn State, I came to know that usually if you want to become a professor, I had assumed that if you get a PhD from a particular place, they will hire you, but they don't.
Uh-huh.
So then I applied for many different places and, landed up at Texas A&M because my partner is also professor here. So both of us were very lucky to get a job here, and we've loved it here and been here ever since, and are raising a Bryan native.
Right. So I'm fascinated by the matchmaking part of this story. So it seems like, I mean, we've spent our whole lives, childhood and adulthood, hearing about sort of the beauty of the idea that we get to go into the world and choose the person that we want to be with, and that, arranged marriages, I mean, not that this was an arranged marriage, but that this was
arranged by my parents too. So we were introduced by our parents. So
right.
When people think of arranged marriages, they think your parents will pick somebody from the street and say, hey, go get married to that person. But that's not how it works, at least not in my family. But
right.
They sort of helped facilitate some of the initial discussions. But then I think in my particular context, it makes sense because we are very family-oriented culture, and so when you get married to someone, you are actually getting married to their family.
Right.
So it's important for the families to kind of get to know each other and also like each other.
That's
so
the truth.
Since that was already in place, so it kind of clicked. So I mean, I do know of people who have met, 30. 35 people,
right?
And then, then found the match, and so it's each one interprets it in their own specific ways. Tinder does some of that now, and whatever,
right.
eHarmony or whatever.
That's what I was going to say. Is it almost sounds like a family version of a dating website or a
right.
matchmaking, like an official matchmaking service. Mm-hmm. What sorts of questions are they asking the other family? Like, obviously, it's the relationship between the families is
right.
That's an easy one to sort out because
right.
they're talking directly with each other,
right.
but then what do they, so if you say, I want someone who, I'm just picking something random, I want someone who loves cricket, mm-hmm. or who really enjoys old movies, mm-hmm. do they, how do they find that person? Like, what's their way of searching for someone who has these qualities?
Yeah, it's at that time it was still facilitated by the media, actually, because you have newspaper columns where you have ads, matrimonial ads.
Oh, this is brilliant.
And now we have websites which do the same.
Okay.
So it's not uncommon, for instance, even if you have what are called matrimonial websites now, for families to read profiles together.
Oh.
And discuss. And so it's driven by the particular subculture and families that you're raised in. That, of course, I'm not trying to glorify arranged marriages at all, because I do know some of them that can go completely wrong. But the process itself, it worked for me. And I'm very grateful that I found the right person.
Sure, of course. So the really interesting thing here is it sounds like it's very much the way that your family did it. It sounds like it's very much the way that we do dating in America, with just the steps are switched.
Right.
Here, you meet the person and then you meet their family. Mm-hmm. There, it sounds like your families meet each other and then you meet the person.
Yes.
That's great. I love this. Okay.
But like I said, there was a bit of rebellion there because they were like, you can't get married to the person.
Right.
first person.
Yes.
And I said, but you introduced me to this person.
Right. You said your system worked. And I said, no, it worked too well.
No, too well. Then I had to fight with them to get married to the person they wanted me to get married in the first place.
Right. I love it. So let's talk a little bit about your work. Can you define for us and for our audience what a media psychologist is?
Yes. So as you know, we live in a hyper media saturated world. And what I'm really interested in studying is how this exposure to media content that we, it could be anything from newspapers, magazines to, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. So all of that, how does that shape who we are? How does it shape our beliefs and attitudes and how we respond to people? So as a media psychologist, it kind of brings together media studies with social psychology. And so I'm kind of very interested in how people are responding to media, but also how they're selecting media and as well as processing media. So a lot of times people will ask me, do media have good or bad effects? But it's not very simple like that. Mm-hmm. There are many multiple steps involved in between exposure and even action or beliefs. So there is a lot of, it's a very fascinating area to study and so relevant today. So when I look at my path of how I got here, it's incredible to think about its relevance today in our lives. Yeah. It was an accident that I got into communication, but it's such a great accident.
Right. In terms of how people select media, I thought that was interesting. One of the things, to me, the most obvious place that someone will go when they're looking at media is confirmation bias.
Right.
They want to find something that bears out the things they already believe to be true. So other than confirmation bias, how do you feel people select media? What are the things that they're looking for other than the things that agree with them?
Right. And that's a really important question, because a lot of times, we're going to media for different reasons. So It could be for information and learning about something. And at that time, hopefully people are looking for multiple sources.
Right.
When they're not sure about a topic or they feel that, I might want to know more about this, but I don't know what this term means or what this issue is.
Okay.
But then you could also go for social gratification. And I feel that often is influenced. That's where you want to kind of have conversations with others or, connect with others. And you can see a lot of the social media use is especially helpful in making those connections. You connect back with friends from long ago. Mm-hmm. You share pictures with your grandma and so on, right? So there's that social network aspect of those needs are being gratified. You also have a need, everybody has a need for storytelling or listening to stories and entertainment.
Sure.
So a lot of times people are going to media, of course, for diversion or just getting immersed in a beautiful narrative.
Right. What happens next will blow your mind.
Yeah, yes, suspense or comedy, romance, so many different genres that provide that entertainment, right? And then it could also be just personal identity and how you're using media to understand who you are or express who you are, or you have a voice and you want to share that voice with others. So there are different reasons why people select media. It serves multiple needs. And sometimes the same thing could serve different needs, or the same need can be served by different media types as well. So these are largely the ways in which people select media. Of course, you also sometimes just happen to come across some things and it makes sense to you and so on. There's also media avoidance, that some people might actively avoid certain types of content which does not fit their value system or does not serve a need for them. Or media, if media is replacing some other time, displacing other things like social activities, they might avoid that and deliberately take a break. And people take social media breaks to connect back with themselves or their families or their work. So there's also that aspect of selection as avoidance.
So let's talk a little bit about that. So when we first got Facebook, when we first got MySpace, when we first got maybe not so much Twitter, but when back in the days of Friendster and Zanga and all of those pre-Facebook social media, connectedness was a big pitch of social media. And you mentioned earlier the idea of being able to check back in with friends from high school or from elementary school and share photos with your grandma. But the unintended side effect of all of this is we are in some ways less connected than we used to be. And it seems like we have more weak ties than ever and perhaps fewer strong ties. Does that bear out with your understanding?
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it, because there is connectedness in terms of a broader reach of people that we are able to keep in touch with, and that does serve a need that you have. But then maybe we are not going so much in depth in terms of those relationships. And I don't know if media per se provides you the opportunity to have those conversations. It can be done. It can be done, but it depends on the commitment of those who are coming there to do that. So you could have, for instance, a Twitter conversation which is meaningful and it feels like you are furthering a dialogue. But that's rare, becoming rarer and rarer. And, like I think you were also getting at this notion of echo chambers and just staying within the same kinds of groups. But the ways in which people, why people do that is also because they want to feel affirmed in their values and their belief systems. And they might feel threatened by different belief systems and values. But I think that process that has really been, has been, it used to happen more organically, how we have those conversations. But it seems like now it's the way social media is set up. Sometimes it feels like it's not facilitating those connections with your people or your community, or different voices within your community.
We have broader sets of connections than we ever have, but they're not running as deep as they did previously. So then it seems like the question becomes, we like the breadth, we don't like the lack of depth, and then where is actually optimum? Because there are only so many hours in the day, and we can choose either I can connect with a new person that I've never met before, or I can spend another hour talking to a person that I already know and digging deeper into that relationship. So I think it would be interesting, and I don't know if there's actually like a pat answer to this, but to find out, okay, what actually is the right mix, so to speak. And
yeah, it's interesting that people sometimes are reporting that they feel very lonely despite the fact that they're actually very active, let's say, on social media. They have a lot of friends on followers and so on. So that disconnect is fascinating, right? So there is a sense of being with everybody, but still not feeling connectedness. And maybe that speaks to a different need that's not being served. That comes from engaging perhaps with face to face. Perhaps it is with having meaningful conversations that make you feel connected, or it could even be in terms of having a better connectedness with yourself too. And the more you feel connected with yourself or comfortable with who you are, that sense of loneliness or disconnect is going to go away. So, I don't know if media can solve those kinds of things, and we'll always look to ask those questions. As a media scholar, of course, I'm always asking, can media solve this issue? But some things it cannot be, because you need to do some work in terms of, empathy and caringness towards self and others. And, that's why education is so important. And campuses and classrooms give us that opportunity to go deeper and have those conversations with people.
I think there's another element to it too, which is that by construction, Facebook and especially Twitter and Instagram, all of your interactions are public.
Yeah.
They're in front of everyone. And so the proverb on Instagram is everyone's putting their best foot forward. Everyone, to a degree, there is at least some element in most posts of, this is really cool. Look at this really cool thing. And often, not always, but often the extension of that is, look at how great my life is. And we aren't sharing publicly because we don't want to share publicly the things that upset us. And sometimes we talk about the things that we're mad about, but we don't talk about, my life is really not what I would like it to be in this particular way. You don't throw that on the street. That's a conversation that's better had one-on-one. And social media has really facilitated public discourse, but it hasn't so much facilitated private discourse, the quiet moments. Everything on social media feels very loud. And so I do agree that it's affecting our ability to have quiet conversations.
Because you often have to respond right away.
Yeah.
And sometimes we do need to take some time to reflect and think about it.
Sure.
But the way social media in particular set up is that you're expected to respond right away, and that leads to a certain type of conversation, which, as you say, it's also public. So you still have to be kind of conscious about what you say. So that's I think that's where we need to kind of build in other avenues for having those types of more in-depth conversations.
Right. You were a DJ at one point.
Oh, gosh.
How did that come about?
So actually, I come from a family of musicians. So music has been a central part of my identity. And I still practice, if not every day, I sing very often. So in college and high school, I used to sing in All India Radio. And it was classical Indian music. And when they started FM radio in Chennai, my hometown, they said, you can sing, you have a good voice. Why don't you DJ? And I said, what am I DJing for? And they said, this is some hard rock. I said, I have no clue. I have nothing to do with hard rock. They said, we can't find anybody. Just do something. So for a year or two, I was doing this metro hour at noon, but I would go to the All India Radio. And I think of it now, what a privilege, to go up there. And they had a huge collection of CDs at that time, and you could pick anything and play. So I would have no clue about what I'm talking about. So I would pick a CD, and let's say it says Pink Floyd, I would say something about the color pink. And it was an experience which kind of also has shaped my interest in media and and in youth culture and so on. So that is not a very well-known part of my life, but it's something that brings back fond memories.
Your research examines how stereotypes and counter-stereotypes in popular culture shape everyday attitudes about race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality. Mm-hmm. So first things first, what's a counter-stereotype? Yeah,
so a counter-stereotype is literally anything which challenges a cultural stereotype. Okay. So it is just the opposite of what you might see. So it need not be... some people misunderstand it to be always positive. Mm-hmm. But, even negative, even so-called positive stereotypes can actually have negative effects. Okay. So a counter stereotype is a way to kind of have a counter story or a counter example, right? Or a character which goes against the typical portrayal of a particular group. And here we're talking about group identities and how groups are portrayed. So a group could be portrayed, let's say, as highly. So it can be portrayed as criminal or lazy, right? Or sexually promiscuous or something like that. But then the counter stereotype takes the opposite and constructs a more complex character, or a more complex story beyond the narrow ways in which a group could be portrayed.
What's the most surprising thing you've learned in your research recently?
That's a very good question. A counter stereotype actually does help to bring down the stereotypes that you have about a group. Okay. Because some of the research had been suggesting that maybe counter stereotypes are not helpful, and that they might reinforce the stereotypes, and it's going to kind of make things worse. But actually, I find that my research is showing, surprisingly, that people do respond positively to positive portrayals. Mm-hmm. And even a single character is able to make that shift for some people. Okay. And that's pretty powerful, and that's pretty, helpful, because when you talk to people who create stories, you could point to these studies and say that my research team is finding that even just exposure to one episode with a positive character is able to bring down some of the prejudice.
Huh. Do you have an example of that?
Yes. So we showed some examples of how, let's say, Asian Americans are being portrayed. Okay. And then you have an example from, let's say, Fresh Off the Boat, then seeing that changes how people might view immigrants and Asian American immigrants. So, there is a value to having these counter narratives out there, which help us to see a different perspective on a cultural group that might not be, out there per se.
Mm-hmm. Your CV also mentions prejudice reduction. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that. Any tips on how to reduce our own inherent prejudices?
Yeah. So all of us have biases. So all of us, come to the world with certain viewpoints and perspectives. So a lot of it is in terms of if you're self-aware about implicit and explicit biases. Sometimes you make judgments that are shaped by your implicit biases, and you might not even be conscious about them. So it becomes very important because it's actually shaping your decisions about how you perceive a person, how you might hire them, how you might assess them, how you might promote them. All of these decisions are also, so it's influencing not just you, but it might be also influencing how you are in the workplace or how you are in a community and so on. So it's really important, I think, to learn how to be aware of your biases and how to reduce them. And as a media psychologist, I'm interested in the role of media in doing that. Mm-hmm. So like I said, I think one way is actually to think about how can we be more mindful of the things that we consume and share and create as media producers ourselves. All of us are media creators these days. So that's media literacy is one aspect of that. And the other aspect of it is more at the industry level. We need to think about how do we change the conversations? How do we change the types of images out there? How do we change the ways in which groups are being portrayed? And so the two have to, I think, happen together. And some of the work from my research lab is showing that when people are more motivated to be media literate in what they consume, as well as when they're exposed to counter stereotypes, the combination of those work the best. So you have to have the motivation to be open to being aware of your biases and change, and also be exposed to a variety of diverse portrayals of groups. That those combinations then change the ways in which prejudice is experienced. It lessens prejudice, which is of course it has to be a series of studies done in multiple contexts with multiple audiences for us to kind of learn more about these findings. But this is very encouraging as the first step.
Sure. So you mentioned media literacy a couple of times, and we talked briefly offline about that. Mm-hmm. For most people, I think when they think media literacy, they think the ability to interpret media in terms of what's real and what is, for lack of a better term, fake news, mm-hmm. that sort of thing. But you were helping me understand a little bit earlier that there's more to it than that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. So media literacy is talking about issues of access to media. So in some very basic ways, there might be, let's say, some countries where, or some parts of a state where people, or some parts of the community where even access to media is limited. So that's something that has to be, universal access is really important. But also in terms of, like you said, how to evaluate the messages that we are receiving and creating, assessing them and seeing what kind of impact does it have on others. But I'm also saying that media literacy should go beyond the self, because a lot of it is focused on teaching skills about self-branding, self-promotion. So how do we use media literacy in terms of knowing how to navigate, let's say, creating a website, knowing how to put myself as a brand out there, right? In on social media even. Right. But I think that it can serve a bigger, broader agenda. So the question is that what does it do for social transformation? What does it do for community building? What does it do for bringing groups together towards a common goal? Like, how can we use media to find common ground? How can we use media to further the needs of our communities? So media literacy helps us to also assess media to see, is this media content helpful for not just me personally, but is it helpful for me as a citizen?
So what do you think are the best ways that people can look for avenues to help their communities?
So I feel that media can play the role of learning more about one's community. I mean, that community can be local, but it can also be expanded up to the global.
Okay.
And so, it can help to form networks of support. It can help to form coalitions. It can help to move forward on conversations of what are the needs of our community. Mm-hmm. How do we use media to tell the stories that aren't being told, that are missing? Because we get so caught up with the sensational, what is Kim Kardashian wearing, the Met Gala?
Oh, yes.
So I think that's why I want to bring media literacy back in terms of, yes, it's fine for entertainment and it's diversion, distraction,
Sure.
That's serving a need. But then how do we then take the power of participation? How do we take the power of engagement that media spaces can offer and use that towards larger goals like peace, sustainability, and understanding of one another. Mm-hmm. So because you could spend hours engaging online, but really not do much with that.
Right.
But I feel like if we are clearer on the goals that we have in terms of where do we want to go next as a community or in the world, and use media as a tool to get there, then that is also part of you using media effectively. Mm-hmm. So that is also part of media education and media literacy, beyond just teaching you how to create the best, YouTube video.
Right. We talked a little bit about bias earlier. Do you think there's a future for news aggregators like Neocortex or Nowhere that try to draw only on reputable sources and remove bias from reporting as much as it's possible to do that?
Yeah, I think it's not possible to eliminate bias. Everybody comes in with a certain perspective, and so I think it's important to maybe focus on what is the intent and who's gaining from this piece of information. Is it a political gain, a profit? What is the intention behind that? So that is there. But I think there is a need that people have started feeling for getting more accurate news stories that are based on facts. But on the other hand, as a communication scholar, I also understand that you want to use media to also, like I said, connect with people and also to say who you are. And sometimes in wanting to do that, the not so true news stories actually will be shared, because it's like, how do rumors spread? How do gossip spread?
Sure.
From time immemorial? Why do we spread gossip and rumors even though we know it's not true? Oh, because you want to, because you want to in some ways strengthen that friendship.
Right. It is a way of connecting.
So it's a way of connecting.
Even if it's dialed into something that is in some way false.
Yeah. So we can't assume the people are just rational beings, and the reason why they don't why they're consuming fake news is only because they don't know that this is fake. And if they knew this, they would make that rational decision of only going with the news consolidators who collect this. They obviously are getting some kind of need gratified through sharing things that are false and that are not scientific and not based on facts. So we'd have to examine this whole phenomenon from a broader sense beyond, is this fact or fiction? And if people knew that it was fact, whether they would be more mindful. That's one step, but there are other steps involved.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about the courses you teach. So one is called Women, Minorities, and the Media, and our producer had the luxury of taking this course and another course, which we'll talk about momentarily. He claims this course, Women, Minorities, and the Media, is your favorite class to teach.
Yes.
Why is that?
Yes. It is. It's a great way to bring in my interest in diversity and media studies together in one class, because we take the word minorities and kind of play with that every week in a different context. So we could take people who have disabilities because they are minoritized by structures in place that might not, are serving able-bodied people. Right. Or we're looking at religious minorities or sexual minorities or people who have, are discriminated based on body size and so on. So I really like the scope that this class allows me to, but also the depth of conversations that we go in. So actually we sort of, I set up the class to be discussion oriented, and we set some ground rules, basic ground rules in terms of, everybody actively listening to all perspectives without making judgments right away. Sure. And of course, we are not going to use vulgar language and so on, but also not generalizations. People like you, those people, and so on. So I allow people to share what they experience personally, but also what they've witnessed, and use those experiences to also listen to others in class. And it's really enriching. Every time I teach that class, I learn so much about the students themselves. So we try to see, I start the class with an assignment saying, have you ever been in a situation where you felt like a minority? And how was that experience? It could have been like when you went on a study abroad program, right? And where you went to maybe Italy and you suddenly aware that you are American. Right. You never thought about that before. And everybody's talking Italian and you don't know what's happening. And so we talk about what were your emotions and thoughts in those moments. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's just even being at a party where you didn't know anybody.
Sure.
And what was that like? And then from that point, over the course of the semester, we start to build a sense of empathy and compassion that is sort of grounded in your own experience, that everybody has felt out of place at some time, marginalized. Way, yeah. So because we start with that self-reflective exercise, it helps to then see that, when I have experienced this myself, so I can see how others for whom this could be every moment of their life, mm-hmm. or a large portion of their life. So then how do we change structures and build in some flexibility to accommodate and so on?
And then the end goal of that, it would seem, is really that we eventually are all finding the places where we can most easily lift each other up.
Right.
Is that
right.
Is that the end game?
Yes. So it's the course is all about just validating who you are. I feel like everybody should feel comfortable with who expressing who they are, what their thoughts are in this class. And by listening to one another, we understand what is difference, the value of difference, and how media becomes a place where that can be celebrated, and where those stories which are missing can be shared. So, I think they go away with media literacy, but also diversity literacy. Because if you see, a lot of time diversity is understood as a commodity. How do I sell the institution as a diverse place? But diversity is not just a commodity. Diversity is a literacy. So it's a lifelong skill that how do we negotiate difference? How do we learn to work with difference? So that's why I really like that course.
Another course you instruct is Media, Children, and Adolescents. Tell us a little bit about where you go with
this
that.
This is a course that I created because of my interest in media literacy. A lot of the ways in which we want to influence the next generation of youth, and who are very actively using media, and there's a lot of outcry in media. You would hear there's a lot of concern that video games are making our children violent, or that spending time on YouTube is making them let's say if you're watching a lot of videos about makeup on YouTube, that's making you have negative impressions about your own self and leading to less self-esteem. So we do hear those stories in the media. So this course goes in depth and looks at, what is the science behind this? What is the social science telling us about what's going on? So we look at even other things like parents or teachers, schools. How are these playing a role in our children's lives? And how does that connect back to media literacy, and how do we understand media's influence on youth and children? Because if you look at adolescents, they're in a phase when they're trying to understand who they are, and they're changing physiologically. There are changes, but this is also a time for identity building. So it's a very interesting phase to study and learn about. In fact, just the other day, I ran into one of my students from that class who's now a school teacher. And she said that so much of what she learned in that class has really helped her as a teacher. And now she's going to Dubai to teach there.
Wow.
So some of the things, of course, I build in diversity aspects in all the courses that I teach. So she said that's going to help her as she goes to a new country to teach children who are quite different from her own background.
What is a reasonable approach for a parent then to take concerning their child's approach to media? Because I feel like kids and teenagers are going to find a way to be involved in media in some way. And that's not a bad thing for the most part. So what are some reasonable steps to take in terms of shaping an intelligent approach to media from a child who's becoming a teenager, who's becoming an adult?
I think that as parents, actually, what is interesting, a lot of the studies are actually showing us that the children are concerned about their parents' use of media and how they are
it's about to be
not.
me, Kyle.
Parents are spending so much time with their phones and not spending enough time with us. So we get that as well.
Okay.
So it's not always like we often assume that it's going to be the parents telling no to their kids and to stay off the phone. But we are actually seeing a little bit of a shift in that. I think that as teenagers, all of us who have been teenagers know that, there's a sense of rebellion and you want to do things behind your parents' back. And so all of that is going to happen. So there is Finsta, which is fake Instagram, and that you create. So being with studying youth sometimes gives us insights into how media is continuing to play the same types of roles that it might have done in previous generations, but it's just a different way of doing that. So I certainly think that how parents approach media has got a lot to do with parenting styles. So you can be a very authoritarian parent where you say that this is the rule, you have to follow this. And that's how it is. And you can't question my authority. Mm-hmm. We all know parents like this. And then there's the other extreme, which is complete laissez-faire.
Anarchy.
You are the children are the kings and queens of the castles, and you can do whatever you want, and we will follow suit.
Right.
And or there can be neglectful parenting. Parents who don't know anything about what's going on mm-hmm. in their parents' life. They don't care to know, and or they can't, or they don't have the means, or they don't care to know. So there's like neglectful. That's kind of not even having any role at all. So the fourth is what I would say is called the authoritative parenting style that is most effective when it comes to how you do it. So this approach is when parents and children have a conversation about, okay, what are the needs and what are the boundaries and what are the ways in which we already discuss what would be appropriate or not appropriate, and through those conversations. Mm-hmm. So there's also literature on what's called active mediation, where especially with younger children, that what we find is that when parents kind of sit along with children and watch together, co-viewing for little kids, and use that as an opportunity to discuss about what's going on. And that's been really helpful in building those bonds between children and parents. So at different ages, you have different types of things that are working. So it's very exciting to study this because you need to take a developmental perspective where at different age ranges, that ways in which you, as a parent, engage with the child is going to be very different from if your child is 2 years old versus 12 years old.
Sure. So let's move to some rapid fire very briefly. So what do you consider your most valuable failure?
I'm pathetic at gardening.
Oh.
I've been known to kill cacti. And then there was this air plant, which is supposedly doesn't even need water. Mm-hmm. But somehow I managed to kill that too.
Yeah. My wife has learned from previous plant-related shortfalls, and I got her an orchid a couple of weeks ago, and she's been watering it with ice cubes, mm-hmm. And she has another succulent I think that she's doing the same thing with, and she's very proud that they have survived this long. So, hi baby. What do you think is people's biggest misconception of you?
People assume that I don't know English, or I wouldn't know how to speak that. And so they're very surprised that I can be a communication scholar. Uh-huh. And the thing is that English, I mean, if you know the history of India, the British brought English to us. And for good or bad, I have a education that was in English mm-hmm. throughout life. So that's something that people often assume I might not know.
Very quickly, maybe this is not a question with a quick answer, but in talking about communications in the United States versus in a country like India, mm-hmm. do you think that there are like in the Inuit language, they have 30 different ways of saying snow.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that there are certain linguistic differences that either facilitate better understanding of communication and media in America versus elsewhere?
Yes. So I can say that in India, we have so many different languages and so many different cultures. So if you take an Indian currency note, it has something like 16 or 20 different scripts.
Oh.
So that every part of India will know that this is a 100 rupee currency note. So if you have to do a campaign, ad campaign in India, you need to actually know the cultural aspects of each of those different areas and linguistically different areas, also culturally different areas in approaching that campaign. So for me, so diversity was something that I sort of grew up with in India in terms of having to communicate across different types of people. And of course, there are different religious groups and so on too, because of the rich history. And similarly in the US, when I came here, the thing is, because of the history of immigration in the US, we have so many different groups of people from so many different countries and backgrounds here. And that to me was the most exciting, but also quite a challenging aspect of communication. Coming to the US, also a very big country with so many different groups of people here. But I think that my growing up in India, that experience then helped me here to be able to understand or listen to different even languages, the ways different English is spoken, for instance, right? And that flexibility doesn't just stop with the language, not just in terms of listening. And I feel that it leads to a deeper appreciation for different cultures.
If you could have anyone as a mentor for one day, who would it be? So we prefer to, you probably saw this, but we prefer to avoid parents or religious figures from our own religion. If you want to choose a religious figure from another religion, that's fine. But if you could have anyone as a mentor for one day, who would it be?
I'm missing that question, but I think I would love to have Gandhi as a mentor. When you think about the ways in which he was able to use his voice to effectively dismantle a huge system of colonial rule, just by raising consciousness and raising awareness, and be able to rally a huge nation together to bring them together. It's I would love to be mentored by Gandhi for a day. If we could go back in time and bring him back here.
Yeah. What is your fondest memory of Texas A&M?
Oh gosh, so many fond memories. It's going to be hard to pick anyone. A fond memory, of course, every class is very special. But I teach this first gen freshman class in liberal arts. And, there are moments in that class where students would say, I never even knew this. I never even thought about this. And that moment, you feel like, so gratified as a teacher. And I especially feel that a lot in that class. So that's a memory that will always stay with me.
Okay. So first gen is first generation college students?
First generation college students. First time in college in their family.
Right. Okay. That's great. We end each session with Good Bull. This is an opportunity to recognize someone else for something good or great they have done. Do you have anyone you would like to send some Good Bull?
I would pick former Provost Karen Watson.
Okay.
and she will probably not remember this at all, but when I was expecting my baby, at that time, 13 years ago, it was a very, not many people who are professors in their first year of joining as a professor have a baby. And so I was really nervous that this means the end of my career. So I went to her office and I told her, I was crying and I said, I'm so nervous because I got this job with a lot of hardship and here I am, I'm going to fail. I don't think I can do both being a scholar and a mother. And she said, wait. First, congratulations. I want you to enjoy this moment. I want you to, this is such a special moment and we want you to bond with your child and not worry about it. It will all work out. And, it did eventually work out, but I always go back to that moment and really appreciate how she made me feel like I could do it. It's possible. And she wanted me to cherish that moment and be with that. So I shout out to her as an administrator on campus who really at that time she was the dean of faculties, so who looked out for a lot of us.
Very nice. I'd like to send Kyle some good bowl. And
yes, absolutely.
And our other production techs, Megan Barsinski and Julie Faulkner. We really appreciate everybody's fine work in helping make this podcast happen. So, thank you for your time. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to stay up to date on our latest videos, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to receive notifications. If you're in a rush or on the road, you can still join us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. If you want to learn more about us or our guests, please visit our website at mays.tamu.edu/podcasts. Also, please check out Mays Business School's academic programs. They're the sponsors of our show, and you can find them in the description. Thanks, and gig 'em.